Nancy's abortion death was a fairly typical criminal abortion death in that it was performed by a doctor. It also was retroactively declared safe and legal. This is Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and today is February 8th. Welcome to the Sisyphean Journal, where we talk about women's abortion deaths and how they could be prevented. Of course, I would like to prevent the abortion entirely, but sometimes either the woman's dead set on it or somebody else is, and there's the question of how we stand between the women and fatal quackery. In November of 1967, Nancy, a student at the University of Oklahoma, told her boyfriend Fred that she was pregnant and wanted an abortion. Fred contacted his father for help. On January 30th, 1968, Fred's father contacted osteopath Dr. Richard Mucie at his ear, nose, and throat clinic in Kansas City to consult with him about an abortion. Mucie wanted to know how far advanced Nancy's pregnancy was, and there were some calls back and forth between the dad and the son and Mucie. Eventually, Fred indicated that Nancy had been examined by a doctor and was about 13 or 14 weeks pregnant. On February 7th, Nancy and Fred flew from Oklahoma to Kansas City and visited Mucie at his clinic. Mucie examined Nancy while Fred waited, and he told the couple that he would contact them at their hotel. The two of them had dinner and went to a show and then went back to the hotel to wait. At about 11 p.m., Mucie called the couple and arranged to pick Nancy and Fred up at their hotel room and drive them to the clinic. He took Nancy back into the back room while Fred waited in the outer office. About 20 to 30 minutes later, Mucie came out dressed in a surgeon's gown and asked Fred for the money, and Fred handed over $400. And then Mucie went back and started the procedure. Now, it wasn't until about 7:30 the morning of February 8th that Mucie finally came out and asked Fred if he wanted to see Nancy. So Fred went with Mucie into the office and saw Nancy lying on a couch with a cover over her. Fred said hello to her, and she smiled and moved her hand. Mucie told Fred that Nancy was still sedated. Fred went back into the waiting room to nap. He was awakened about 11:30 that morning by Mucie's porter. Mucie told Fred that Nancy had suffered a heart attack and was in shock and had been taken to the hospital, which she hadn't. She was still there. He told Fred that he would come back for him, then went back into his office. Fred went looking for him, followed the sound of his voice to a back room where Mucie was lying on a cot talking on the phone and saying something about a death certificate. Fred was stunned and went back out to the waiting room. Mucie came out a few minutes later and told him that Nancy was dead and that they needed to stick with the story that the couple had just been traveling in Kansas City. Nancy had chest pains, so Fred brought her to Mucie's clinic at 11 o'clock at night. Yeah. So while Mucie was instructing Fred on how to stick with the cover story, the ambulance crew arrived. They saw Nancy lying on the cot. Mucie told them that she had a pulse and instructed them to take her to osteopathic hospital and to administer oxygen on the way. The ambulance driver and attendant noticed that Nancy's fingernails had blood on them, her arms were stiff, and her hands were in a clawed position. They lifted Nancy and found that she was already stiff. The doctor at the hospital concluded that Nancy had probably been dead for about 4 hours. He called Mucie, who told him that he had been treating Nancy for 2 weeks for a heart condition. Nancy's body was taken to the morgue where a detective observed the autopsy and noticed needle marks on her arms, buttocks, and left breast. The detective took custody of Nancy's uterus, which had a tear about a half an inch long inside it, and it also still contained the skull and upper spine of a fetus of roughly 4.5 to 5 months gestation. Most of the remainder of the fetus, consisting of a shoulder blade, upper arm, and shoulder joint, and part of a collarbone, were found in the trash at Mucie's clinic. An autopsy found abundant evidence of an abortion, including stains from the antiseptic on Nancy's upper thighs and genital area, and, of course, the tear in Nancy's uterus. The condition of her uterus, heart, and other organs indicated that she'd gone into shock and had probably died at about 9 a.m. In spite of Mucie's efforts to resuscitate her, she had bled to death. Now, during the trial, Mucie took the stand and came up with a story he hoped the jury would believe. He confirmed that he had gotten the call from Fred's father and that they'd made repeated calls back and forth trying to figure out the gestational age. But Mucie said that he did not agree to perform an abortion. He only agreed to examine Nancy to verify the gestational age. They had come, Fred and Nancy had come to his office. He charged them $4 and examined Nancy and found her to be 4.5 to 5 months pregnant. And he said he told Nancy that she was so far along that nobody would be willing to do an abortion. Mucie said that Nancy became frantic, saying that it would kill her father to learn about the pregnancy and that she would kill herself if nobody would do an abortion. Mucie said that he gave Nancy some medication to calm her down and then dropped the young couple back off at their hotel. Now, Mucie said that he ran some errands, went home, went to bed, and got a call from Nancy. Quote, she was crying and hysterical and feeling very ill, so he told Nancy to come back to the clinic. When the couple came back to the clinic, Mucie said Nancy told him, I had to do it. I just had to do it. And he described at length examining Nancy. Quote, she was in a state of aborting, and at this time, immediate medical attention had to be instituted. So he described at length the procedure to finish the abortion that Nancy had supposedly started for herself. And he described treating her for the complications that she'd suffered. Of course, in court, when we look at the amount of time between the procedure that he performed and when Nancy died, they asked, why didn't you chart this? If you were a doctor doing legitimate medical care, why didn't you document it? And he came up with some lame excuses. And of course, the jury did not really believe him. Mucie was convicted on June 8, 1968, of performing an abortion not necessary to preserve the life of the mother. Now, illegal abortions at that time carried a penalty of 3 to 5 years, with the sentence to be increased if the mother died. So Mucie was sentenced to 10 years, but he only served 14 months before he was released on parole. His parole was going to expire on July 27th of 1977, and his medical license was revoked in May of 1971. Now, after Roe versus Wade overturned Missouri's abortion law in 1973, Mucie successfully appealed his conviction and got his license restored under a ruling that made Roe retroactive in Missouri. So he was released from probation and his record was expunged. Her abortion was retroactively safe and legal.